Chapter 4. Gregory's Mass came and went by. Kristin had believed so surely that her time must come then at the latest. But now it would soon be Mary's Mass in Lent, and she was still about on her feet. Erland was forced to go to Nidaros for the mid-fast thing. He said he would surely be home Monday night, but now it was Wednesday morning, and he was not yet come. Kristin sat in the hall, scarce knowing what to be about. It was as though she had no power to begin upon any work. The sunlight streamed in through the smoke vent. She felt that outside it must be like spring today. She rose up and threw a cloak about her. One of the maids had told her that the folk said if a woman went beyond her due time, a good way was for her to let the horse she rode at her bridle eat corn from her lap. Kristin stood a little while in the hall door. In the blinding sunlight the yard lay all brown, but glittering rills of water ran in bright frozen runnels through the horse dung and litter. The skies were spread bright and silky blue above the old houses. On the two figureheads fixed to the beams of the east storehouse, the traces of their old-time gilding shone out today in the clear air. Water dribbled and ran from the roofs, and the smoke whirled and danced in little mild puffs of wind. She went to the stables and in, and filled the lap of her skirt with oats from the corn bin. The stable smell and the sound of the horses stirring there in the dark did her good, but some of the folks were in the stable, and she was ashamed to do what she had come to do. She went out and threw the grain to the hens that were scratching around and sunning themselves in the yard. Her thoughts far off, she looked at Tor, the stableman, currying and brushing down the grey gelding. It was fast shedding its winter coat. Now and then she shut her eyes and turned her face, faded and pale with the indoor air, up to the sunshine. So she was standing when 3 men rode into the courtyard. The foremost of them was a young priest whom she did not know. As soon as he was aware of her, he leapt from his horse and came straight up to her with outstretched hand. "You had not meant me this great honour, I think, that you, the lady of the house, should come forth to welcome me," he said, smiling. "But I must thank you for it nonetheless, for I think that you must be my brother's wife, Kristin Lavransdatter." Then you must be Master Gunnulf, my brother-in-law," she answered, flushing red. "Well met, sir, and welcome home to Huseby." "Thanks for the fair welcome," said the priest, and he stooped and kissed her cheek, after the fashion she knew was used in foreign lands when kinsfolk met. "Happy be your coming hither, Erland's wife." Ulf Halderson came out and bade a groom take the strangers' horses. Gunnulf greeted Ulf heartily. "Are you here, kinsman? I had looked to hear that you were a wedded man and a householder by now." "Nay, no wedding for me, till I must choose between a wife and the gallows," said Ulf with a laugh, and the priest laughed too. "I have pledged me to the devil to live unwed as firmly as you have promised it to God." "Aye, then should you be scatheless whichever way you turn, Ulf," answered Master Gunnulf, laughing, "for you will do well the day you break your promise to yonder man. And yet 'tis said also that a man should keep his word, were it to the fiend himself. Is Erland not at home?" he asked in wonder. He proffered Kristin his hand as they turned to go into the hall. To hide her bashfulness, Kristin moved about among the serving women and saw to the spreading of the board. She bade Erland's learned brother sit in the high seat, but when she would not sit there with him, he moved down to the bench beside her. Now she was sitting at his side, she saw that Master Gunnulf must be shorter than Erland, by half a head at least, but he seemed to bulk larger. He was stronger built and more thick-set in body and limbs, and his broad shoulders were quite straight. Erland slouched a little. He was clad in dark raiment, most seemly for a priest, but the long cassock, reaching to his feet and upward almost to the band of his linen shirt, was fastened with buttons of enamel, and from his woven belt his eating gear hung in a silver sheath. She looked up into the priest's countenance. He had a round, strong head, and a round but thin face, with broad, low forehead, cheekbones a little large, and a fine, rounded chin. The nose was straight and the ears small and comely, but his mouth was wide and thin-lipped, and the upper lip came forward never so little and overshadowed the lower lip's little splash of red. Only his hair was like Erland's. The close-cropped ring around the priest's tonsure was black, with a dry, sooty gleam, and looked as though 'twere as silky soft as Erland's mane. For the rest, he was not unlike his cousin, Munin Bardson. She could see now, it might be true, that Munin had been comely in his youth. Nay, 'twas Arshild, his mother's sister, that he favoured. Now she saw that he had the same eyes as Lady Arshild, amber-yellow eyes shining under narrow, straight, black brows. At first Kristin was a little shy of this brother-in-law of hers, that had laid up such store of learning at the great schools in Paris and Valland. But little by little she forgot her bashfulness. It was so easy to talk to Master Gunnulf. It seemed not as though he talked of himself, far less that he was fain to flaunt his learning. But when she had time to bethink herself a little, she found he had told her so much that Kristin thought she had never known before how great a world there was outside Norway. She forgot herself and all her affairs as she sat looking up in the priest's round, large-boned face, with its subtle, sprightly smile. He had laid one leg over the knee of the other under his cassock, and sat with his white, sinewy hands clasped round his ankle. When, late in the afternoon, he joined her in the hall, he asked if they should play draughts. Kristin could but answer that she thought not there was any draught board in the house. "Is there not?" asked the priest in wonder. He went over to Ulf. "Do you know, Ulf, what Erland has done with Mother's gilded draught set? The things for pastime that she had left behind her here? Surely he has not let any other have them?" "They are in the chest above the armoury," said Ulf. "'Twas in his mind, I think, that they should not come into the hands of others, that were on the manor heretofore," he added low. "Would you have me fetch the chest, Gunnulf?" "Aye, Erland cannot surely have anything against it now," said the priest. A little after, the two came back, bearing a great carven chest. The key was in it, and Gunnulf opened it. On top lay a cithern and another stringed instrument, whose like Kristin had never seen before. Gunnulf called it a psalterion. He let his fingers stray over the strings, but it was untuned. There were rolls of ribbons, reels of silk, broidered gloves and silken hoods, and 3 books with clasps. At length the priest found the draught board. The squares were in white and gold, and the men were of narwhal ivory, white and golden. Kristin had to own now to her brother-in-law that she was slow-witted at the draughts and had no great skill of stringed music. But the books she was eager to look into. "Aye, belike you have learnt to read in books, Kristin?" the priest asked. And now she could answer a little proudly that so much she had indeed learned while she was yet a child. And in the cloister she had been praised for her skill in reading and writing. The priest stood over her with a smile on his face while she turned the leaves of the books. One was a knightly saga of Tristan and Isolde, and the other held histories of holy men. She opened it at St. Martin's saga. The third book was in Latin, and was in a passing fair script, with great capital letters painted in many hues. "This one belonged to our ancestor Bishop Nicholas," said Gunnulf. Kristin read aloud in Latin, and after a while Gunnulf asked, "Do you understand this?" And Kristin nodded and said she understood a little. She knew enough of the word's meaning to be strangely moved that her eyes should fall on them just now. Her face quivered a little, and she could not keep back her tears. Then Gunnulf took the psaltery on his lap, and said he would try if he could not mend it. While they sat thus, they heard the trampling of horses in the courtyard, and straightway after Erland burst into the hall, beaming with gladness. He had heard who it was that was come. The brothers stood with their hands on each other's shoulders, Erland asking questions and waiting for the answers. Gunnulf had been in Nidaros 2 days, so it was pure chance that they had not met there. "'Tis strange, too," said Erland. "Methought that all the priesthood of Christchurch would have gone forth in procession to meet you when you came home, so wise and stuffed with learning as you must be now." "And how do you know they did not?" asked his brother, laughing. "You don't come anywhere near Christchurch when you are in the city, I have heard tell." "That's true. I draw not near to my Lord Archbishop when I can steer clear of him. He hath singed my hide for me once already." Erland laughed unrepentantly. "And how do you like your brother-in-law, my sweet? I see you have made friends with Kristin already, brother. She cares not much for our other kindred." It was not till they were sitting down to the supper-board that Erland marked that he still had his fur cap and his cloak on, and the sword at his belt. It was the merriest evening Kristin had yet had at Huseby. Erland forced his brother to sit with her in the high seat. He himself carved for him and filled his cup. The first time he drank to Gunnulf, he kneeled down on one knee and made as though to kiss his brother's hand. "All hail, Lord! We must use us, Kristin, to show the Archbishop all seemly honour. Nay, for Archbishop you surely will be one day, Gunnulf." It was late before the housefolk left the hall, but the 2 brothers and Kristin sat on over their drink. Erland had set himself on the table facing his brother. "Aye, this gear I had thought on at our bridal," he said, pointing to his mother's chest, "and thought that Kristin should have it. But it's so easy for me to get, and you, brother, you forget nothing. But the ring my mother left hath found its way to a fair hand, methinks." He laid Kristin's hand on his knee and turned round her betrothal ring. Gunnulf nodded. He laid the psaltery in Erland's lap. "Sing now, brother. You were wont to sing so sweetly and play so well in the old days." "'Tis many years since," said Erland more gravely. Then he ran his fingers over the strings. "Good King Olaf, Harold's son, rode in the thick wood's shade, found in the earth a footprint small, here be tidings great. Outspoke he then Finnarnes, and rode of the miney foremost. Fair would show such a little foot, all in scarlet hosen." Erland smiled as he sang, and Kristin looked up at the priest a little timidly, not knowing but he might mislike this ditty of St. Olaf and Ulfhild. But Gunnulf sat smiling, yet she felt sure of a sudden that 'twas not at the song, but at Erland. "Kristin need not sing tonight. I think you are short of breath now, my dearest," said Erland, stroking her cheek. "But now 'tis your turn." He gave the psaltery to his brother. One could tell from the priest's playing and singing that he had been well schooled. The king rode northward into the hills. He heard a dove that made her moan, lamenting that her mate was gone. After the hawkie is fain to ride, it flies through the wild hills far and wide. It led him up, it led him down, it led him into an orchard brown. In that orchard there was a hall that was hanged with purple and pall. There lieth a fair knight in his blood, he is the Lord so brave and good. At his bed's head there standeth a stone, Corpus Domini written thereon. "Where did you learn that song?" asked Erland. "Oh, some boys sang it outside the hostel where I was lodged in Canterborg," said Gunnulf, "and I thought I would try to turn it into our Norse tongue, but it goes not so well in Norse." He sat playing snatches of the tune on the strings. "Well, brother, 'tis long past midnight. Like enough Kristin needs to come to her bed now. Are you weary, my wife?" Kristin looked up at the men in fear. She was very pale. I know not. Methinks 'twere best now I should not lie in the bed in here." "Are you sick?" they both asked, bending over her. I don't know," she said as before. She pressed her hands behind her hips. "My back feels so strange." Erland sprang up and went towards the door. Gunnulf followed him. "'Tis an ill chance that you brought them not here before this, the ladies that are to help her," he said. "Is it come much before she looked for it?" Erland flushed a burning red. Kristin deemed she would need none other but her own maids. "They have borne children themselves, some of them," he tried to laugh. "Are you beside yourself?" Gunnulf gazed at him. "Hath not every cottar's wife skilled women and neighbours' wives to help her when she's brought to bed? And shall your wife creep off and hide herself in a hole like a cat having kittens? Nay, brother, so much of a man I would have you be as to fetch the foremost ladies of the countryside to Kristin." Erland bent his face, flushed with shame. "You say truly, brother. I will ride myself to Rasfold. I must send men to the other manors, and do you bide here with Kristin." "Are you going forth?" asked Kristin fearfully, when she saw Erland put on his riding cloak. He came across and threw his arms around her. "I go to fetch the best women in the countryside for you, my Kristin. Gunnulf will stay with you while the maids make ready for you in the little hall," he said, kissing her. "Could you not send one to Tina Lavransdatter?" she begged. "But not before daylight. I would not have her waked from sleep for my sake. She has so much on her hands, I know." Gunnulf asked his brother who Tina was. "It seems not to me overseemly," said the priest, "the wife of one of your tenants." "Kristin will have it as she wants," said Erland. And as the priest went out with him, and he stood waiting for his horse, he told the other how Kristin had come to know the farmer's wife. Gunnulf bit his lip and stood deep in thought. There was noise and commotion now throughout the manor. Men rode away into the night, and serving women came running in to ask how it fared with their mistress. Kristin said there was not much amiss as yet, but they must make all things ready for her in the little hall. She would send word when she would be brought in there. Then she was left alone again with the priest. She strove to speak evenly and cheerily with him as before. "You are not afraid," he said with a little smile. "No, but I am afraid." She looked up into his eyes. Her own were dark and frightened. "Do you know, brother-in-law, were they born here at Huseby, Erland's other children?" "No," said the priest quickly. "The boy was born at Hunhals, and the little maid up in Strind, on a farm he once owned there. Is it," he asked in a little, "is it that has troubled you, to remember that this other woman lived here with Erland before?" "Yes," said Kristin. "It is hard for you to judge justly of Erland's doing in this matter of Eileen," said the priest gravely. "It was no easy thing for Erland to rule himself. It has never been easy for Erland to know what right was. For ever since we were little children, so it has been that whatever Erland did, Mother thought it was well done, and Father thought it was ill. He has told you, doubtless, so much of our mother that you know all of this." "For all I can remember, he has named her but twice or thrice," said Kristin. "But I have seen well enough that he loved her." Gunnulf said softly, "Surely there has never been such a love between a mother and her son. Mother was much younger than my father. Then there befell this mischance of her sister, Ashild. Bard, our father's brother, died, and it was said, doubtless you know of that too. Father believed the worst, and he said to Mother, Erland flung his knife at Father once when he was a boy. He flew at Father's throat more than once for Mother's sake, when he was half grown. When Mother fell sick, he parted from Eileen Ormsdatter. Mother fell sick with sores and scabs on her flesh, and Father said it was leprosy. He sent her from him, would have forced her to dwell as a commoner with the sisters at the Spittal. Then Erland fetched mother away, and took her with him to Oslo. They went on the way to Ashild, who is skilled in leechcraft, and she and the king's French leech too said that she was no leper. King Hakon welcomed Erland kindly then, and bade him try the virtue of the holy Eirik Valdemarsson's grave, the king's mother's father. Many had found healing there for skin sicknesses. Erland set forth for Denmark with mother, but she died aboard his ship south of Stad. When Erland came home with her, you must bear in mind that father was stricken in years, and Erland had been an unruly son all his days. When Erland came to Nidaros with mother's body, father was in our town dwelling then, and he would not take Erland in, before he saw whether the boy had taken the sickness, he said. Erland took horse and rode off, and did not rest till he came to the farm where Eline was with her son. After that he held fast to her, in despite of all, despite that he himself was weary of her. And so it came about that he brought her to Huseby, and set her to rule his house when he was once master there. She had this hold on him, that she said if he failed her after this, he were worthy to be smitten down himself with leprosy. But now it is time, I think, for your women to see to you, Kristin, he said, looking down at her young face, grown grey and stiff with horror and torment. But when he would have gone to the door, she cried aloud after him, "No, don't go." "It will be all the sooner over," said the priest to comfort her, "since you are so sick already." "It is not that." She gripped his arm hard. "Gunnulf!" It seemed to him he had never seen such terror in a human face. "Kristin, you must remember that this is no worse for you than for other women." Yes, I know that." She pressed her face down on the priest's arm. "For now I know that Eline and her children should be sitting in my place. For he had pledged her his faith and wedded troth before ever I came to be his paramour." "Do you know that?" said Gunnulf calmly. "Erland knew no better himself then. But you know that word of his he could not keep. The Archbishop would never have given his leave that they two should wed. Don't think that your marriage is not good. You are Erland's true wife." "Oh, I had thrown away all right to tread the earth long before he wed me, and it was yet worse than I knew. Oh, would I might die and this child never be born. I dare not see what it is I have borne within me." "God forgive you, Kristin. You don't know what you're saying. Do you wish that your child die unborn and unchristened?" "Aye, because whatever happens, what I bear beneath my heart must be the devil's. It cannot be saved. Oh, had I but drunk the draught Eline proffered me, it had perhaps been some atonement for all we had sinned, Erland and I. Then had this child never been gotten. Oh, Gunnulf, all the time have I known it, that when I should see the thing I had nourished within me, then I would know full well it had been better for me to drink the draught of leprosy that she proffered me, than to drive her to death, to whom Erland had first bound himself." "Kristin," said the priest, "you don't know what you're talking about. It was not you that drove that hapless woman to her death. Erland could not keep the word he had pledged her when he was young and knew little of law or of right. Never could he have lived with her except in sin. And she had let herself be led astray by another too, and Erland would have wed her to that other when he heard it. It was not your doing that she took her life. Would you like to know how it came to pass that she did take her life? Kristin was so hopeless now that she spoke quite calmly. We were at Haugen together, Erland and I, and she came thither. She had a horn with her. She would have had me drink with her. It was for Erland she had meant it, I can see now. But when she found me there with him, she would have had me drink. I knew that there was treachery. I saw that she drank no drop herself when she set her lips to the horn. But I would have rather have drunk. I didn't care whether I lived or died, since I had come to know he had had her with him at Huseby all the time. Then Erland came in. He threatened her with his knife to make her drink first. She begged and prayed, and he would have let her go. Then the devil took hold on me. I took the horn. One of us two, your paramours, I said. I egged Erland on. You cannot keep us both, I said. So it was that she slew herself with Erland's knife. But Bjorn and Åshild found a device to hide how it had come about. So, Master Åshild was of this council, said Gunnulf grimly. I understand now. She had beguiled you into Erland's hands. No, said Kristin vehemently. Lady Åshild prayed us. She prayed Erland, and she prayed me in such a way I know not how I could hold out against her, that we should deal honourably, so far as might be, fall at my father's feet and pray him to forgive us our misdeeds. But I dared not. I made pretence that I was fearful lest father should slay Erland, though I knew well father would never have harmed a man who yielded himself and his cause into his hands. I made pretence that I feared to bring on him such a sorrow that he could never hold up his head again. Oh, but I have shown since I did not fear so much to bring my father sorrow. You cannot believe, Gunnulf, how good a man my father is. No one could know. No one who does not know him could know how good he has been to me all my days. Ever has father loved me so. It was that I could not bear he should know I had borne me so shamelessly, that while he thought I was sitting among the sisters at Oslo, learning all that was good and right, for I bore the novice's weed while I was lying with Erland in barns and lofts down in the city. She looked up at Gunnulf. His face was white and hard as stone. Don't you see now why I am so afraid? She that took him to her when he came tainted with leprosy. Would you not have done it? Asked the priest in a still voice. Yes, yes, yes. A shadow of the wild smile of former days flew over the woman's ravaged face. And besides, Erland was not tainted, said Gunnulf. No one but father ever believed that mother died of leprosy. But surely I must be as a leper in the sight of God, said Kristin. She laid her face down on the priest's arm to which she was clinging. Such as I am now, tainted with all sin. My sister, said the priest softly, laying his other hand on her linen coif. So sinful you cannot be, you young child, that you have forgotten that as sure as God can cleanse a man in the flesh from leprosy, so surely can he cleanse your soul from sin. Oh, I don't know, she sobbed, her face still hidden in his arm. I don't know, and I don't repent either, Gunnulf. Frightened I am, but yet I was afraid when I stood before the church door with Erland, and the priest joined us together. I was afraid when I went with him into the bride's mass, with golden crown on flowing hair, for I dared not speak of my shame to my father. With all my sins unatoned, I dared not confess the truth to my own parish priest. But when I went about here at Huseby in the winter, and saw myself grow fouler with each day that passed, then I was yet more afraid, because Erland was not towards me as he had once been. I thought of the time when he came to me in my bower at Skog at night. Kristin! The priest tried to lift up her face. You dare not think of such things now. Think but that God sees now your sorrow and your repentance. Turn to the merciful maid, Mary, that hath compassion on all that are sorrowful. But don't you understand? I have driven another to cast away her own life. Kristin, said the priest sternly, do you dare to think in your wicked pride that sin of yours can be so great that God's loving kindness is not greater? He stroked and stroked her linen hood. Do you not remember, my sister, how it was when the devil would have tempted St. Martin? Did not the fiend ask if St. Martin dared believe fully his own word when he promised all the sinners he shrove God's mercy? But the bishop answered, to thee also I dare to promise God's forgiveness in the hour that thou prayest for it. Wouldst thou but cast away thy pride and believe that his love is greater than thy hate? Gunnulf stood for a little space, still patting the weeping woman's head. And he thought the while, his mouth white-lipped and hard-set, so this is how Erland had dealt with his young bride. Tina Lavransdatter was the first woman to come. She found the lying-in woman in the little hall. Gunnulf sat by her, and a couple of maids were busy in the room. Tina greeted the priest with reverence, but Kristin rose up and went toward her with outstretched hand. Thank you for coming, Tina. I know 'tis no light thing for your folks at home to do without you. Gunnulf had looked searchingly at the woman. Now he too rose. 'Twas bravely done of you to come so quick. There is need that my brother's wife should have one with her she can trust. She is strange to this countryside, young and unaccustomed. Jesus, she is as white as a coif, whispered Tina. Think you, sir, I might give her a little sleeping draught? I think she had need to win some rest before it comes on her more sorely. She set about making ready busily but quietly, felt the couch that the serving women had made up on the floor, and bade them bring more cushions and more straw. Next she placed small stone pots with herbs in them against the fire. Thereafter she set about loosing all bands and knots in Kristin's dress, and last of all drew out all the pins from the sick woman's hair. Never did I see fairer, said she, when the whole flood of golden-brown silky locks rolled down around the white face. She could not forbear to laugh a little. Methinks it can scarce have lost much, either of strength or brightness, even if it be so you bore it uncovered a little longer than was right. She got Kristin softly bedded among the cushions on the floor, and covered her well with rugs. Drink this now, then you will not feel the pain so sorely, and try to get a little sleep between times. It was time for Gunnulf to go. He went across and bent over Kristin. You will pray for me, Gunnulf? She asked beseechingly. I will pray for you even until I see you with your child upon your arm, and after too, he said, and laid her hand back again under the coverlid. Kristin lay and dozed. She felt almost well. The shooting pains across her loins came and went and came again, but it was so unlike all that she had felt before, that each time they had passed she wondered almost if it were not but her fancy. After the torment and horror of the early morning hours, she felt as though she were already happily over the worst dread and anguish. Aldfinna went about so softly, hanging up child's clothing, rugs and furs to warm at the hearth, and stirring her pots a little so that a spicy smell stole out into the room. At length Kristin fell half asleep between the fits of pain, and dreamed she was at home in the brewhouse at Jorengard, and was helping her mother with the dyeing of a great web of cloth. Doubtless was the steam from the ash bark and nettles. Then came the lady midwives, one after another, ladies from the manors of their parish and of Bergsea. Aldfinna drew back among the serving women, and when evening was drawing on, Kristin felt the pains grew sore. The lady said she should walk about the room as long as she could bear to do so. It was torture to her. The room was crowded with women now, and she must pace about like a mare put up for sale. Between whiles, too, she must let the strange ladies press and feel around about her body with their hands. Then they would talk together. At length Lady Gunnar of Rasvold, who was to have the ordering of all things in the room, said that now she might lie down upon the floor. The lady divided the women in two parts, one to sleep, while the other waked and watched. "Aye, 'twill not be quickly over this, but scream all you like, Kristin, when you feel the pain sore. Take no heed of the sleepers. We are all here for nothing but to help you, poor child," she said gently and kindly, patting the girl's cheek. But Kristin lay gnawing her lips and crushing the edges of the coverlid in her sweat-bathed hands. It was stiflingly hot, but they said that was how it should be. After every fit of pain, the sweat poured from her. Between times she would lie thinking of the food for all these women. She was so fain they should deem that she had her house in good order. She had bidden Torbjorg, the cook, pour buttermilk into the water the fresh fish were boiled in. If only Gunnulf would not deem it a breach of the fast. Sira Eirik had said 'twas no breach, for buttermilk is not milk food, and besides the fish broth is thrown away. The dried fish that Erland had gotten for the house last autumn, they must nowise be let touch, spoiled and full of maggots as it was. "Mary, blessed lady of mine, will it be long? Will it be long, think you, till you will help me? Oh, now it is so hard, so hard, so hard." She must try to hold out a little longer yet, before she gave way and screamed. Aldfinna sat over by the hearth, tending the pots of hot water. Kristin wished so that she dared pray her to come to her and hold her hand. She knew not what she would have given now for the clasp of a friendly hand that she knew. But she was ashamed to ask it. All through the next forenoon a sort of bewildered stillness lay over Huseby. It was the eve of Mary's Mass, and all the work of the place should have been finished by mid-afternoon prayers. But the men were bemused and cast down, and the scared serving wenches scrambled through the housework in slovenly wise. The housefolk had grown fond of their young mistress, and things were going none too well with her, 'twas said. Erland stood out in the courtyard, talking with his smith. He tried to keep his thoughts on what the man was saying. Then Lady Gunnar came towards him swiftly. "We can come no way with your wife, Erland. We have tried everything. You must come down. Maybe 'twill help if she be set in your lap. Go in and put on a short coat, but be quick. She is hard pressed, the poor young thing." Erland had grown red as blood. He remembered, if a woman could no otherwise be delivered of a child she had conceived in secret, 'twas said it might help if she was set on the father's knee. Kristin lay on the floor under some rugs. Two women sat by her. As Erland came in, he saw that she shrank together, bored her head into the lap of one of the women, and rolled it about here and there. But not a moan came from her. When the fit was over, she looked up with wild, terrified eyes. The brown, cracked lips gasped open. Every trace of youth and comeliness had gone from the swollen, red, flaming face. Even the hair was tangled up into a dirty mat, with bits of straw and wool from the sheepskins. She looked at Erland as if she knew him not at first. But when she understood why the women had sent for him, she shook her head vehemently. "'Tis not our use, where I come from, that men should be by when a woman bears a child." "They use it sometimes here north of Dover," said Erland softly. "If it might shorten the pain for you a little, my Kristin, you must suffer it." "Oh!" As he knelt beside her, she threw her arms about his waist and crushed herself against him. Crouched together and shaking, she fought through the fit without a cry. "Can I speak 2 words with my husband alone?" she said swiftly, breathlessly, when it was past. The women drew back. "Was it when she was in labour that you promised her what she said? That you would wed her when she was a widow? That night when Orm was born?" whispered Kristin. Erland gasped for breath, as though he had been struck a blow above the heart. Then he shook his head vehemently. "I was at the castle that night. 'Twas my troop that had the watch. 'Twas when I came home to our lodging in the morning and they laid the boy in my arms. Have you been lying here thinking of this, Kristin?" "Aye." Again she clung to him, while a wave of pain swept over her. Erland dried the sweat that poured down over her face. When she was still again, he asked, "You want me to stay with you, as Lady Gunnar says?" But Kristin shook her head again, and at last the women were forced to let Erland go. But with that it seemed as if her strength to hold out were broken. She shrieked aloud in wild terror of the pangs she felt coming, and wailed out prayers for help. Yet when the women talked of fetching her husband in again, she screamed out no. She had rather be tortured to death. Gunnulf and the clerk that was with him went to the church to hold evensong. Every soul on the manor who was not with the lying-in woman went with them. But Erland stole out of the church before the service was over, and went southward toward the houses. In the west, over the hilltops on the farther side of the dale, the sky was yellowish red. Dusk was beginning to fall in the clear, mild spring evening. A star came forth here and there, white in the light-hued sky. A little flake of mist was drifting over the wood down by the lake. There were bare patches where the fields faced sunwards, and the smell of mould and melting snow was in the air. The little hall lay westmost of the houses, out towards where the ground dipped to the valley. Erland went over to it and stood a while behind its wall. The timbers were still warm with the sun when he leaned against them. Oh, her cries! He had heard a heifer once bellowing in the grip of a bear. It was up at their sæter when he was a half-grown lad. Arnbjorn, the cowherd, and himself had run south through the woods. He remembered the shaggy mass that stood up and turned into a bear with hot, red, open mouth. Arnbjorn's spear broke off in the bear's paws. Then the man snatched Erland's from him, for he stood palsied with horror. The heifer lay there still living, but udder and things were eaten away. "Kristin, oh, my Kristin! Lord, for thy blessed mother's sake, have mercy!" He fled back to the church. The maids came into the hall with the supper. The board was not set up, but they put down the food by the hearth. The men took bread and fish for themselves over to the benches, and sat in their places silent. They ate a little, but none seemed to have a stomach for his food. No one came to take away the dishes after the meal, and none of the men got up to go to rest. They sat on gazing into the hearth fire, and spoke not to each other. Erland had hidden himself in the corner by the bed. He could not bear that any should see his face. Master Gunnulf had lit a little hand lamp and set it on an arm of the high seat. He set himself on the bench below it with a book in his hands, and sat there, his lips just moving, soundlessly and without cease. Once Ulf Haldarsson rose up, went over to the hearth and took a slice of soft bread, then searched a little among the sticks of firewood and picked out one. Then he went down the hall to the corner near the entrance door, where old Arndt sat. The two busied themselves with the bread hidden behind Ulf's cloak, and Arndt cut and carved at the stick. The other men glanced across at them now and then. In a while Ulf and Arn stood up and left the hall. Gunnulf looked after the two, but said no word. He went on again with his prayers. Once a young lad fell off the bench in his sleep and rolled out on the floor. He rose up and looked about him, bewildered. Then he sighed a little and sat down again on the bench. Ulf Haldarsson and Arn came in again quietly and went to the places where they had sat before. The men looked over at them, but none spoke. Of a sudden Erlend sprang up. He went across the hall to his housefolk. His face was as grey as clay and his eyes hollow. "Is there none of you that knows a way?" he said. "You, Arn," he whispered. "It didn't work," Ulf whispered back. "Methinks 'tis written that she shall not have this child," said Arn, wiping his nose. "And then neither runs nor offerings avail. 'Tis pity for you, Erlend, to lose this kind young wife so soon." "Don't speak as though she were dead already," said Erlend, broken and despairing. He went back to his corner and threw himself down with his head within the bed end. Once a man went out and came in again. "The moon is up," he said. "'Twill soon be morning." A little while after, Lady Gunnar came into the hall. She sank down on the beggar's bench by the door. Her grey hair bunched out on all sides. Her headdress had slipped back on her shoulders. The men rose, drew near to her slowly. "One of you must come down there and hold her," she said, weeping. "We cannot any more. You must go to her, Gunnulf. None can tell how it may end." Gunnulf stood up and thrust the prayer book into the pouch at his belt. "You too must come, Erlend," said the lady. The rough, hoarse crying met him in the doorway. Erlend stopped, trembling. He caught a glimpse of Kristin's distorted, unknowable face in the midst of a group of weeping women. She was on her knees. They were holding her up. Near by the door, some serving women had flung themselves down with their faces hidden on the benches. They were praying aloud unceasingly. He threw herself down beside them and hid his head in his arms. Shriek after shriek came from her, and each time it was as though an icy pang of unbelieving horror went through him. "This thing could not be!" Once he plucked up heart and looked across. Gunnulf was sitting now in front of her on a stool, holding her under the arms. Lady Gunnar knelt by her side and had her arms round Kristin's waist. But Kristin was struggling in deadly terror to thrust the other away. "No, no, no! Loose me! I cannot bear it! God, God, help me!" "God will help you soon now, Kristin," said the priest each time. A woman stood by, holding a basin of water, and after every spasm she took a wet cloth and wiped the sick woman's face, the sweat from under her hair roots and the slime from between her lips. Then her head fell forward between Gunnulf's arms, and she slept for a moment. But the torments dragged her out of her sleep again, at once. And the priest went on, saying, "Now, Kristin, will you be helped?" None thought any more what time of the night it might be, but through the smoke vent already the dawn grinned greyly down. Then, after a long, frantic shriek of anguish, there came a sudden utter stillness. Erlend heard the women bustling about. He would have looked up, but he heard someone weeping aloud, and he shrank down again. He dared not know. Then Kristin screamed again, a high, wild scream of lamentation, unlike the mad, inhuman animal cries that had gone before. Erlend started up. Gunnulf stood bending over, holding Kristin, who still knelt. She was looking in deadly horror at something Lady Gunnar was holding in a sheepskin, a raw, dark red mass, like nothing but the entrails of a slaughtered beast. The priest drew her close to him and said, "Kristin mine, you have borne as fair and fine a son as ever mother had need to thank God for. And he breathes," he said vehemently to the weeping woman. "He breathes. God will not be so cruel as to not hear us." Even while the priest was speaking, it came to pass. Through the mother's weary, bewildered head there flitted, half-remembered, the vision of a bud she had once seen in the convent garden, something from out of which broke red, crinkled, silken petals and spread themselves out into a flower. The shapeless lump of flesh moved. Sounds came from it. It stretched itself out and turned into a quite small wine-red child in human likeness. It had arms and legs and hands and feet with full-formed fingers and toes on them. It struggled and wheezed a little. "So little, so little, so little he is," she cried aloud in a thin, hoarse voice, and sank down, helpless between laughter and weeping. The women round about burst into laughter and dried their tears, and Gunnulf passed her over into their arms. "Roll him in a trough that he may scream the better," said the priest, following the women who bore the new-born boy away to the hearth-place. When Kristin waked from her long swoon, she was lying in her bed. Someone had taken off the dreadful sweat-drenched clothes, and a blessed sense of warmth and healing was streaming into her body. They had laid small bags of hot nettle porridge upon her, and packed her in with heated rugs and skins. One bade her hush when she would have spoken. There was a great stillness in the room, and through the stillness came a voice that she could scarce call to mind. "Nicolaus, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost." There was a trickling of water. Kristin rose a little on her elbow and looked out. Out there by the hearth stood a priest in white vestments, and Ulf Haldarsson lifted a red, sprawling, naked child up out of the great brazen cauldron, gave it to the godmother, and took from her the lighted taper. She had her child. It was he that was shrieking now so as to almost drown the priest's words. But she was so weary, she cared but little and only wished to sleep. Then she heard Erlend's voice saying hastily and in fear, His head is so strange." "'Tis swollen up," said a woman calmly. "That is nothing strange. He has had to fight hard, this lad, for his life." Kristin cried out something. It was as though she grew awake right into her inmost heart. This was her son, and he had striven for his life, even as had she. Gunnulf turned quickly, laughing, caught the little bundle of swaddling clothes from Lady Gunnar's lap, and bore it over to the bed. He laid the boy in his mother's arms. Sick with tenderness and joy, she rubbed her face against the little glimpse of a red, silky soft face within the linen cloths. She looked up at Erlend. She knew that once before she had seen him with a grey, ravaged face like this. She could not remember when. She was so strange and dizzy in the head, but she knew that it was well that she need not remember. And it was good to see him stand thus by his brother. The priest had laid a hand upon his shoulder. A sense of measureless peace and safety came upon her as she looked up at the tall man in alb and stole. The round, lean face under the black ring of hair was so strong, but his smile was comely and kind. Erlend drove his dagger deep into the timber wall-post behind the mother and child. "'Tis needless now," said the priest, laughing, "for the boy is baptized." Kristin came to think of something Brother Edvin had once said. A new christened child, he said, was as holy as the holy angels in heaven. 'Twas washed clean from the sins of its parents, and as yet it had done no sin itself. Timidly and warily she kissed the little face. Lady Gunnar came over to them. She was worn out and weary, and wroth with the father who had had not wit enough to say a word of thanks to the lady helpers. And the priest had taken the child from her and borne it to the mother. She should have done that, for she had delivered the woman, and besides that, she was godmother to the boy. "You have not greeted your son yet, Erlend, or taken him in your arms." Erlend lifted the baby out of its mother's arms and laid his face against it for a moment. I doubt I shall scarce come to like you from my heart, Narkvi, until I have forgotten that you tormented your mother so cruelly," he said, and laid the boy down again by Kristin. "Oh, yes, that's right. Blame him for it," said the old lady wrathfully. Master Gunnulf laughed, and then Lady Gunnar laughed too. She would have taken the child and laid it in the cradle, but Kristin begged hard to keep him with her a little longer. Soon after she fell asleep, with her son close in by her. She knew dimly that Erland touched her warily, as if he feared to hurt her by a touch, and then slept again.